There are all kinds of Sega fans out there. The old guard began as Sega started its console journey with the likes of the SG-1000 and ultimately the Master System. They loved the simple charms of Alex Kidd or just enjoyed the exclusives that never showed up on Nintendo's machines. Then you have the guys and gals that started out around the time Sonic showed up, clinging to the Little Blue Blur's momentum for dear life. They were late to the party but still quite the dedicated bunch. You had the sports-crazed jocks that just couldn't get enough of Madden, and the dozens of other sports franchises that graced Sega's 16-bit behemoth. Be it basketball, boxing, baseball, whatever, they saw the Genesis as the place to be to play out their athletic dreams. Then there's the Saturn fans that love the platform so much they spent untold amount of money importing games from Japan. They absolutely refused to let all those great games go unplayed. And finally, the good old Dreamcast crowd, Sega's last hurrah. They packed in to see what all the fuss was about and partake in some of the best fighting games and shoot-'em-ups of that generation. They got a couple of decent Sonic games out of that too. The simple truth is, you can't really put Sega fans in a box and define them all the same way. They came in at different times, enjoyed different games, and came to see the company very differently from one another. I'm telling you this because this episode you are about to see is about Sega's Astro City Mini, a tiny arcade machine replica that is loaded with games from Sega's past. Your interest in these games will likely vary depending on what type of Sega fan you are. If you came in later during Sega's home console run, few of these titles are likely to appeal to you. But for me, I've been a fan from the earliest days of Sega's rise as a prolific maker of coin-operated goodness, and this product was easily my most anticipated release of the year. In this episode, we're going to go over the games and features of the Astro City Mini, Sega's tiny arcade replica. Before we look at the games, let's take a look at the unit itself. It's modeled after Sega's 1993 Astro City line of sit-down arcade cabinets. These units were built for Japanese arcade centers to be multi-purpose and to standardize a form factor that had superior build quality, a big beautiful monitor, and to be easy to move around. In essence, it brought both a pleasing and matching aesthetic to arcade centers around Japan, while providing the versatility to easily transfer games in and out of cabinets already setting in place. Change the attract topper, pop in a new PCB, and change the control panel if need be, and you had a new game making money without moving in a completely new cabinet. Sega had an entire line of these types of products back then for pretty much every type of game. If you walked into a Japanese arcade in the mid-90s, you would see plenty of these machines lining the walls. I have no nostalgia for the design myself other than the fact I know they existed. My arcade experience included smoke-filled rooms, neon lights, and dedicated machines that were heavy as a damn barrel of cement. Still, the design is classic and a huge part of Sega's Japanese arcade history. The dimensions of the Astro City Mini are quite a bit smaller than I was expecting. Top to bottom, it's only about 8 inches tall, or roughly a little larger than the Neo Geo Mini that was released a few years ago. One thing that did meet my expectations was the build quality. From the plastic to the micro switch latent control panel, this thing is built absolutely perfectly. It's light, but not so much that it feels cheap, and it has cool little accents like stereo speakers, LED lights, and a CRT-like bezel. The back of the unit has all the expected hookups and switches. You have an on-off button, an HDMI plug, a 3.5mm headphone jack, a micro USB power port, and 2 standard USB plugs for your Player 1 and Player 2 controllers. First impressions are great when sizing up the unit with your eyes. It looks like an Astro City cabinet, and it's built like an Astro City cabinet. The design does have some slight disappointments, however. It doesn't take batteries to make it easily portable, something that would have been a great touch. The display of the Astro City Mini is also widescreen, despite every game on the unit either being 4:3 or taking advantage of a Tate-style vertical orientation. This is a curious choice that was probably made to use off-the-shelf parts and keep costs down. On the plus side, the image quality is rather good on it. It's bright, clear, and the view angle ain't bad at all. The little joystick has a nice clicky feel, and the buttons are serviceable as well. Unfortunately, they are too close together, and if you have medium-sized hands or bigger, this thing becomes a chore to play for any real length of time, a problem that dogged me for the entire review. Let's go ahead and plug in an HDMI cable now so you can see the front end and all its features. Once you have an HDMI cable plugged in, the screen on the unit goes out and everything is then sent to the TV or monitor in 720p. You have a few display options you can choose from there. You can do fake scan lines if you're into that sort of thing, and you can choose a wallpaper to decorate the black borders that run around the games. I personally can't stand fake scan lines, so that's staying off, and I like the Astro City border so much I left it on. Scrolling through the games, you can see multiple screenshots, check the button layout for each one, and even play some music from the highlighted selection, though not every game supports this. It's a great lineup of games too. You have action titles like Shinobi and Golden Axe, you have puzzle titles like Columns and Puyo Puyo, and you have some shoot-em-ups like Thunder Force AC and Scramble Spirits. If you were a Sega console kid, this group likely won't hold much sway over you, but if you were around in the 1980s and early 90s arcades, there is much here to celebrate. Each title also has save states so you can resume your gameplay at a later time. Right off the bat, I was stoked to play Virtua Fighter, in what is the very first time this game has ever been brought home arcade perfect. Or so I had hoped. Just a few seconds in, I realized there was some trouble. It clearly runs slower than the arcade, and there are graphical hitches here and there that catch your eye. The worst of these offenses happen during the replays, when there are times the performance goes completely in the tank and it becomes a slideshow for a few seconds. It of course did not do that in the arcade. There are also some pacing issues, and there is definitely some input lag you'll need to adjust to. It's enough to give an already bullish AI quite an advantage in later fights. The good news is that the gameplay itself during matches is overall solid, and you can still get quite a bit of enjoyment out of it. The polygon counts are so much higher than any port we've ever seen at home before, and the 720p resolution is quite a bit higher than the original arcade. I mean, just take a few moments and look at it compared to the Sega Saturn release from 1994. I suppose the big question is, do the replay frame drops and the input lag ruin it? For some of you it absolutely will, but considering the state of this game's emulation today, I don't think anything here is broken. Virtua Fighter happens to be the only polygon game on the entire system, leaving nearly 40 other games for you to play. And there are some real doozies here. It has Golden Axe the Revenge of Death Adder, the very first time it's been home on a Sega-made device. This is the two-player version of the game, and for the most part, it runs quite well. I noticed no glaring issues with the sound, visuals, or gameplay. The ultra-sharp sprites and backgrounds look fantastic. If you had planned on buying this thing for the 4-player co-op, however, you may want to reconsider. It also has Arabian Fight, which is a flashy beat-em-up with loads of sprite scaling. This is again the 2-player version of the game, and no option for 4-player co-op exists. This one always took a bit of getting used to because of the way it played, but it still has a really unique presentation that makes it worth checking out. The Racing Classic Radmobile was a surprise addition, and it actually isn't bad here. I thought the digital inputs would destroy the gameplay, but it actually handles well enough to enjoy. It's a great rundown superscalar memory lane. It has a whole host of classics from there. Shinobi, Golden Axe, Fantasy Zone, Altered Beast, Wonder Boy, Shadow Dancer, and eSWAT, just to name a few. Remember, these are arcade originals and not home Genesis ports, and some of them have never been officially reissued before. For the most part, I did not notice any crippling emulation woes in any of them, and enjoyed playing all of them. Every so often I did seem to catch the speed of the music being off a bit or the sound being distorted here and there, but again, it wasn't so painfully obvious as to ruin anything. For casual play, everything here is quite impressive. Let's take a look at a few seconds of some popular games so you can hear and see it for yourselves. One thing that became abundantly clear about 10 minutes into playing the Astro City Mini was that not buying an extra controller for it was a huge mistake. While the little joystick and buttons on the unit feel good, extended play is hand cramping and quite uncomfortable. Trying to do anything in Virtua Fighter towards the end is nigh on impossible. You need exact timing, and playing on the unit itself just doesn't afford you that. I had heard that this was going to be compatible with the Retrobit Sega USB controllers, but I couldn't get any of my Retrobit controllers working with it. Saturn, Genesis, and generic USB pads would not pick up no matter what I tried. This means that in order to get some comfort while playing, I have to shell out $40 for one of those Astro City pads that was released with the unit, pushing my investment upwards of near $200, which doesn't appeal to me in the slightest. I've heard that the Japanese Mega Drive Mini 6-button controllers work, but I don't own one to test it out. The US Genesis Mini pads do not work, however. My other problem I had was the fact that you have no access to the setup options of the arcade games. You can't change the difficulty or region, leaving some of these games hard as nails and with stories you can't read. None of that matters in some of them because the challenge was perfect to begin with, and many are in English anyway. But stuff like Arabian Fight and many of the puzzle titles have cutscenes with quite a bit of text, and you won't be able to read it unless you know Japanese. I was also initially pissed off that Space Harrier had its controls reversed. I can't play anything that way and thought it was ruined. After eyeballing the control description further, however, I found some of these titles have additional instructions you really need to pay attention to. Space Harrier's directions can be reversed, for example, and other games have secondary information that can really help you better enjoy them.
Get ready.
Expectations and first impressions are a hell of a thing. I knew I needed to temper my sky-high desire for this thing to be perfect. Emulation on a budget rarely is, so I knew there would likely be some issues. And you know, I can live with a Virtua Fighter that has a few problems. The gameplay itself isn't bad, and most of the slowdown is contained within the replays after the match. I noticed some sound and music discrepancies here and there in a few titles that really weren't bothersome, so I can live with those as well. What does bother me is the lack of support for Sega's own licensed USB controllers. This is an utter and complete cash grab to make you purchase their other Astro City themed pads and arcade sticks. This is no small thing. To import even the vanilla pads, you are looking at another $40 or so, and the arcade stick is well north of $100. After 2 hours of hand-cramping gameplay on the tiny layout on the unit itself, I realized that I would rarely be putting myself through this again. I can take it for a casual burst of 5 minutes here and there, but no way will I be doing it again for extended periods. That leaves me with a split recommendation for you guys. If you are a casual gamer just looking to relive some childhood memories, go get yourself a Sega Genesis Mini for $50 on Amazon. At least Sega's officially licensed controllers work with that. If you have no problem shelling out extra funds for an Astro City Mini controller, the 2D emulation here is quite solid overall, and I think most of you will find it very much worth playing. I'm pretty happy with the unit outside of Virtua Fighter's emulation quirks and Sega's shoddy support for its own licensed products. The 2D emulation is rock solid for a device at this price point, and the build quality is simply outstanding. If you have interest in it, I highly advise you consider the cost associated with it and the game library itself. These two things are easily the most important factors that will affect most of you. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.